and others who have worked the equipment to provide that as an offering to others. Right. This morning, we're going to be looking at three individuals. We've been talking quite a bit about Abraham, and now we're switching to some of his offspring. And we're going to start this morning in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 20. It says this: by faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. So here we see the lineage and promise passed unto Isaac, sons of Jacob, to his sons, Jacob and Esau. Isaac passes it to his son, and we read about this in Genesis chapter 27. Let the people serve thee, and nations bow down to thee. Be Lord over thy brethren, and let thy mother's sons bow down to thee. Cursed be every one that curseth thee, and blessed be he that blesseth thee. So here we see the battling brothers, Jacob and Esau. Jacob gets blessed, Esau not so much. Jacob is told that his brother and his brother's offspring will bow down and worship him. And then the promise to the Jewish nation, everyone that curses Israel will be cursed. Everyone who blesses Israel will be blessed. So same promise that was given to Abraham now being passed down through the lineage. And the stories continue and the blessings continue throughout. So Isaac's confidence in his father's promise is evident when blessing his son. All right, Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. And I will bless them that bless thee, curse them that curse thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So here we see the promise of Jesus Christ. Here we see that Israel, the nation of Israel, rather, the Jews, Jesus will be born into this group of people, and through him, the whole world, all nations of the earth will be blessed through him. Isaac's son Jacob got off to a good start. What do I mean by that? Well, the promise to Abraham, as you remember, is that he would have so many offspring that it would be more than the stars in the sky, more than the sands on the earth. And Jacob had 12 sons. 12 sons who later became the 12 tribes of Israel. And upon Isaac's deathbed, he called in 2 of his grandsons and emphasized the promise. And in a way, he was making sure that his grandsons knew of the promise and was blessing them. So we go to Genesis chapter 48, verse 16. The angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Some of you have had your parents pass already. What if your dad, upon his deathbed, called you in and gave you this blessing? Or in this case, it was grandsons. Said, lads, you're gonna multiply. So get out there and get a wife and get started. Basically, what he said, you're gonna have so much in the middle of the earth that it's part of the promise. So Jacob had faith in what his grandfather had told him. He anticipated descendants so plentiful that they covered the earth. We too can believe in all of God's promises. So when we're talking about these messages on faith, we're seeing examples of our forefathers, the promises that God had made to them and how they believed, not in their faith to make these things happen, but they believed in God who made the promises. And the takeaway in every single message for you and me is we can stand on God's promises. We can believe everything that he has said will come to pass. Some things already have come to pass. Some things we are still waiting on. So Jacob and his sons and their families left the promised land because of a famine. And they sojourned to a place called Egypt to escape the famine. Joseph, by faith, instructed his bones to be returned to the promised land. So we're quickly fast forwarding through many years. They're in the promised land. There was still other nations or other people groups in the promised land, and it wasn't time for them, or God had instructed them at this point to battle them in any way. But a famine struck. Remember, Abraham had large flocks of animals, lots of servants, and the family is growing exponentially. But a famine struck, and they said, we got to go up to Egypt. Must have heard they had food up there. So everybody departed and went to Egypt. Fast forward, Joseph, if you guys remember, went to Egypt a little bit earlier before his family, and ended up becoming Pharaoh's right-hand man, had great favor with Pharaoh and among the Egyptians, and did some pretty neat things, including saving his family. But by faith, Joseph instructed his bones to return to the promised land. So they went to Egypt, but Joseph knew and stood on the promise of God that one day we would own this land. It would be our property. It's a promise of God. So he said, don't let my bones stay here in Egypt. He instructed them, take my bones back, put them in the promised land, what I have been looking forward to. Hebrews 11:22. By faith, Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel and gave commandment concerning his bones. So remember, they went up to Egypt to escape a famine, right? How long do famines usually last? A few years, right? Until the rain comes back, replenishes the land. But what we find out is that the people that went up there, all of Abraham's descendants, kind of liked it in Egypt. And even when the famine was over, they didn't return. They got, if you would say, comfortable there. So here we see Joseph knowing that one day Israel is going to return to the promised land that God had given him. Take my bones with you. I don't want my bones to be here. Do you see here that they named the land Israel? Okay? This is the first time we've seen this. Hebrews. They actually named it. Named the land Israel. They didn't name it to claim it. They didn't name it like it was the power of a positive confession. They were not attempting to manifest their faith that one day this will be. It was a real faith found in the confidence in the word and character of another. That's what faith is. We saw faith of Abraham's son to believe in what his dad had told him. We see the same in his grandsons to their fathers. Here we even see it in Joseph. Confidence in the character of the one who made the promise, in the word of the one who made the promise. Does God keep his word? Can he go against his word? God is not a man that he can lie, the Bible tells us. So when God says he's going to do something, he's going to do it. And you and I can have confidence in him to follow through with it. So Abraham had this confidence to Isaac. Isaac passed down this same confidence to Jacob. Jacob had confidence in God, passed it to Joseph. They weren't trying to bring about something to pass by their faith. Rather, their faith came from a reality apart from what they believed about it. One of my friends growing up as a teenager wore or had a bumper sticker that said, "God said it, I believe it, that settles it." That was his bumper sticker. Later on, I saw a theologian that said, "God said it, that settles it." It doesn't matter what you believe in it or not. If God said it's going to happen, it's going to happen. You don't have to believe it. And that's the truth. Confidence that these men found was God said it, that settles it. It's going to happen. But the belief in it was indeed passed down throughout all these generations. And it was a beautiful reality apart from what they believed about it. God works through our believing, but God initiates it. God always initiates it. We are not faith freelancers. We don't get to concoct something and say, "All right, God, now it's your turn to join me in this." It's the other way around. God initiates, and then we join in arms with him. So while in Egypt, while escaping the famine that is now over, Israel multiplied, and they stayed for a while. When I say a while, I mean 400 years. They stuck around Egypt. It wasn't just, "Hey, we're just going to go up here and get a couple loaves of bread, and then as soon as the land replenishes, we'll go back." 400 years they stayed. Exodus chapter 1, verses 5 through 7. "And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls. Okay, so we went from his kids to 70 souls. "For Joseph was in Egypt already. Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceedingly mighty. And the land was filled with them." Land was filled with them. Here we see the beginning of the promise. Started with 70. 70 turned into 7,000. You read your Bible. 7,000 turned into 70,000. 70,000 turned into 700,000. They got used to Egypt. They got used to the culture. They got used to the food. They got used to the climate. And they stuck around. So you ask the question, how would God ever get them back? How would God ever get his people back to the land that he promised them generations ago? The promise is still alive and well. How will he get them back? Well, we go to Exodus chapter 1. We're going to find out. Exodus chapter 1, starting in verse 8. I have it up here in micro print for you. All right. "Now there rose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we." Talk about immigration policy. Egypt was reevaluating it. Wait a second. We opened our borders. They came over, and they've multiplied exponentially. They're bigger than we are. They're mightier than we are. "And he said unto his people, Behold, the people are mightier than we are. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also our enemies and fight against us. So get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built up for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel." See, what Egypt didn't know is that God had made a promise to them that they were going to multiply. And God just made it happen. The program didn't stop, even though they were in a foreign land with pagan gods, etc., etc. They grew exponentially while there. Israelites' mothers were having so many babies that Pharaoh, even though they tried to afflict them as they were building for them, tried to make their days longer, and etc., things actually got better for them. So he got so frustrated that Pharaoh instructed partial birth abortions. And we have that term today, but he did it back then. And he instructed all the midwives, as the baby is being born and you discover that it's a male, kill it immediately. Kill all the male Jewish boys. Well, the midwives received their instruction and promptly disobeyed the Pharaoh's orders, which says something about the Israelites. The midwives answered to God, not lowercase g gods. They realized that there was divine life in humans. They said, we're not doing it. We won't do it. What's the instruction for you and me today? When government requires us to go against the laws and commandments of God, we have every right and obligation to do so. We can disobey governments. We can disobey courts. We can disobey law enforcement when they go against God's laws. We see here the midwives even employed deceit to cover up the fact that they weren't aborting the male Jewish boys. Did God have a problem with Christians lying? You know, growing up, told never lie, don't do it. Does God have a problem with that? Does God have a problem with deceit when we are carrying out and protecting other Christians? It's interesting how he responded to the midwives lying. Exodus chapter 1, verses 20 through 22. Therefore, God dealt well with the midwives. And the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. It came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. He blessed them. Gave them secret birthing centers, okay, where they could have these Jewish boys and the government doesn't know about them. Safe houses, if you will. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. Now, I'm sure there was a few zealous Egyptians out there that walk around the neighborhood and listen for crying babies and immediately bust down the door and pull off the diaper, and if it was a boy, zealously grab that boy, run to the river, and chuck the boy in the river. But God provided safe houses. I'm sure there was lookouts, and I'm sure as a mother living at this point in time, you would do everything in your capacity to keep your children alive. God dealt well with them. This is where we enter in Moses' parents. You look at the front of your bulletin, I call it the first basket case. But not really, because Moses was messed up in many ways, just like you and me. We go to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23. It says this: by faith, Moses, when he was born, okay, he was born at the time of the partial birth abortions. He was born at the time of throw the young boys in the river. He was hid 3 months by his parents because they saw that he was a proper child. They were not afraid of the king's commandment. Don't be afraid of the government's rules that go against God's law. Don't be afraid of the government. Don't be afraid of what they could do. Moses' parents had faith in God's promises. They recognized Moses would be used by God. He was a proper child. He met all the criteria. Their faith was not in a child, but God who promised them the promised land. Now, this doesn't mean that they were afraid. Doesn't mean that they were afraid. And the government can get scary with us. Persecuted Christians living in other countries right now. Imprisonment, up into including death, just for sharing the gospel. Attached to your email this week was the Bowdens update for February. They included a persecution letter. I'd like you to read that when you get a chance. When things get rough in their neighborhood, their 12-foot gates save them. Because there are mobs of people who are happy to lynch and kill Christians. Pray for them. This doesn't mean Moses' parents weren't afraid. They just didn't let their fear control their decision-making. It should be the same with you and me. Yeah, the government can be scary, and yes, we're going to face persecution, but never should we let our fear impact our decision-making. After 3 months of hiding a crying little baby boy named Moses, off to the river in a basket he went. Wait a second, I thought they were trying to keep the baby boy out of a river. They were. This is part of the plan. Pharaoh's daughter would go down to the river. Guess they didn't have running water in the Pharaoh's palace. She had to go down the river like everyone else and bathe there. She would take all of her maidens with her to probably carry all of her perfumes and conditioners, and probably consumed 30 women carry all that stuff if they're anything like my wife and daughters. I have 1 bar of soap and 1 bottle of shampoo, and the rest of the shower is filled with lots of products for women. I can imagine it was no different for Pharaoh's daughter. Anyway, one day she's down there bathing, and it just so happens that the little basket fashioned by Moses' parents was put in the water, and it drifted right in front of Pharaoh's daughter while she was showering. She looked upon this little baby boy in the basket, saw how beautiful a child he was, and said, I'm going to raise him as my own. Pretty cool story how it all worked out. Well, as you guys know, he was a young child still breastfeeding, and Moses' older sister just happened to be nearby and said, hey, I know somebody who just lost their child. She could take care of this young boy for you. And Pharaoh's daughter said, so be it. Cool part was Moses was raised by his actual biological mother. She got to breastfeed him, got to love him and kiss on him, and got paid nonetheless by Pharaoh's daughter to do it, and he got to live. All the while getting to hear all of the promises that have been passed down through Father Abraham, all the way to Moses. Not only did he get to learn to read and speak Hebrew, he also got the blessings of a full Egyptian education as well, because at a certain point in his life, he went and lived in the palace with his Egyptian adopted mother. And he would have remembered the stories that had been passed down through his Hebrew lineage. Genesis 15, 13 through 16. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them. Okay, so they knew that the Jewish people, Israel, was going to be a servant in a foreign land. And they shall afflict them 400 years. Isn't this incredible? God predicted to Abraham, you guys are going to go to a foreign land. You're going to be indentured servants. And he even gave them a number. 400 years you're going to be there. And also that nation from whom they shall serve will I judge. And afterwards shall they come out with great substance. And thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. We do the math. 360 years of the 400 years have passed when we're entering this story with Moses. 360 years since Israel was in Egypt. You do the math, 40 more years to go. Moses was now 40 years old. Long time before he was the first basket case. He's 40 years old now. Living the life as an Egyptian / Hebrew, but he had to make a decision. Had to make a decision. Some of us know people who have dual citizenship. My wife's friends, she ended up knowing quite a few people from Penn State who were students from abroad. And they have dual citizenship here in America and elsewhere. Some places allow you to have them, some places don't. He had to make a decision because he was living a life of an Egyptian, but he had roots and his blood was Hebrew. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24 through 25 speak to this. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, 40 years old, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. In the Bible, Egypt was always a picture of the world. Okay? Always a picture of what the world has to offer a Christian. And it's no different today. When the Bible speaks of the world, speaks of Egypt, speaks of a place that is not of God. We're living in Egypt right now. The world has a lot to offer us, a lot to distract us. And he had to make a decision. Do I want to be part of this world, or do I want to be part of the new world? Do I want to live in Egypt, or do I want to live in New Jerusalem? Do I want to be part of God's city, or do I want to be part of, quite frankly, Satan's city? That's a decision all of us have to make. Moses made the decision at 40 years old. He made the choice to identify with his people like others. He thought he could help God fulfill God's promise. Well, what was God's promise? To get the people out of the world and back to the promised land. Acts chapter 7 tells us what happened. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. He got the great education there as well. And was mighty in words and in deeds. And when he was a full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. Seeing one of them suffering wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed, and smote the Egyptian, murdered an Egyptian. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how that God by his hand would deliver them, but they understood not. Now understand that the Hebrew people were indentured servants. Taskmasters we just read were put over them, made them work sun up till sundown and then some. Young children, as soon as they were able to do any level of work, were immediately employed as well. They thought that would keep them down. They thought that would reduce the reproductive rates. Didn't happen because God's promise was still happening. One day he went out and saw a servant, a Hebrew person being treated poorly by the taskmaster, and took it upon him to stand up for him, hoping that all the people say, look how strong Moses is. Look what he did when we were being picked on by the Egyptians, he smote them. He's going to be the one that's going to free us from the slavery. That was his political ploy. Well, as we read, they didn't understand. They didn't buy his political speech. We don't believe in you, Moses. We're going to wait for somebody else, something else. Believing his brethren would see his passion for relieving them of their affliction and see Moses as God's choice for Israel to lead a rebellion, they did not understand. So what did Moses do after killing an Egyptian? Well, he knew the law of Egypt. He knew that the squad was going to be coming after him for killing somebody. So he ran. He ran. He fled into the wilderness, the Bible tells us in a quick synopsis, got married, became a shepherd, became a father of two. He did all that at age 40. Well, we pick back up 40 years later. He is now 80 years old. 80 years old. And God speaks to Moses for the first time in a long time through a burning bush. And tells him some interesting things. By this time, Moses is 80 years old. He's given up on his idea of being the guy that's going to free Israel. He's figured God has another plan. I mean, he's in retirement mode. You guys know what that is? I'm done proving myself. I don't need to do anything special. I'm in retirement mode. And then God shows up. And this is where faith begins. Genesis 15, verse 13. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, shall serve them, and they shall be afflicted 400 years. 399 years of indentured servanthood has passed. God speaks to an 80-year-old man through this burning bush. God commands Moses to return to Egypt and show supernatural signs to Pharaoh, causing Pharaoh to let Israel go. What did Moses do? He obeyed. Just like Abraham obeyed. Just like Jacob obeyed. Just like Joseph obeyed. He obeyed as well. Moses obeyed. He walked right up to Pharaoh and said, let my people go. What did Pharaoh say? Sure, no problem. Let me help you. 1 year later, 10 supernatural miracles, which by design, embarrassed every single lowercase g god of Egypt, showed how fake they were, showed how incapable they were fighting against God. And that ended the 400 years of being a stranger in a strange land. Moses then led them out of Egypt to 40 years of camping. 40 years of camping in the wilderness. This is a faith-building experience for sure. We'll end here this morning, today, with 5 action words or phrases that I'm going to pull out of Hebrews 11, verses 25 through 27. First thing I've commented a little bit on, but choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. You and I also have to choose rather a choice in our lives. Life of faith begins with us making a choice that God cannot make for us. I wish he could, because, boy, everyone would get saved. It's a choice that each and every one of you have to make. Will I live a life of faith, or will I live a life in this world as a follower? It's our choice to choose one of two paths: suffer the affliction with the people of God, or enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. There's your two options. Which one's sweeter? Which one's sweeter? This morning, we're going to celebrate communion because those who celebrate communion have made the choice already. And we're living in a wonderful country where we don't have a lot of affliction. Most of you can probably get away at work mentioning the name of God, maybe even Jesus Christ, maybe even inviting people to a Christian function of some sort, and get away with it, not be fired, not be made fun of, not beat up, persecuted, imprisoned. But don't worry, there's a day that will come. You haven't suffered already. So, choosing rather, a choice that you and I need to make. Verse 26, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. Moses chose self-denial. He made a choice based on what he valued, which is what we all do. We all make choices in our lives on what we value, how we spend our time, where we spend our money, where we put our energies into. What each man chooses to value sets a man apart from others now and for eternity. You bring your values to God, or your values cause you to avoid God. You bring your values to God, or your values bring you or cause you to avoid God. Many value religion. Talking about legalists. By God, the doors are open on Sunday morning. You better be there. Have I beat any of you up for not being here? Have I ever called you and made you feel bad because you haven't been here for a bit? It's not about a building. Many value religion. Many value a good name. Scream, cuss, and holler all the way to the church parking lot, and then before they open the car door, all right, zip it. Put on your Sunday smile. Here we go. They believe our name's good. We're going to keep it that way. Many value the fruits of virtue, be respected in the community, to be called upon, to have the high seats, to do the good works so that everyone can see. My name's on the brick. Plaques on the back of the pew. I bought 4 of them. And I put the roof on the church. I'm waiting for someone to tell me they're going to put a roof on the church. We'll put your name up there. Don't worry. Oh, you'll be able to see it. I'll spray paint the whole roof. You can see it coming both ways. But few value a personal relationship with God. What do you value most in life? It will set you apart for now and eternity. Same verse, different emphasis. For he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. Like Franny Crosby, to see with spiritual eyes past the instant gratification to the reward of what God had promised is the working principle of faith. I'll say that again. to see with spiritual eyes past the instant gratification. Abraham heard the promise but never got to see. Moses heard about the promise, and we know he never got to see it. He saw it with eyes afar off, spiritual eyes. Some of you won't get to see some of the promises happen either. But to do that, to see it with spiritual eyes afar off, is the working principle of faith. Moses committed himself to pursue God's promises to Abraham. It motivated him to receive the end that God had promised. What am I saying to you this morning? Don't give up. God is faithful. He will come back again. He will make all wrongs right. Justice will be had, and his children will be protected all along the way. Hebrews 11:27, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king. If your affections and my affections are for the will of God, we will not fear the opposing kings. We are excited and motivated by God's promises. We won't fear the opposing kings. We won't fear presidents. We won't fear legislators. We won't fear the IRS or the ATF or Homeland at all. As my sheriff friend calls it, the alphabet groups. All those three-letter groups. And he's a law enforcement man. And he even fears them. And Moses' choice was to pursue the kingdom of heaven was due to his seeing the invisible God. If God can give our forefathers in the Bible the ability to see the spiritual eyes, he can give it to you and me today. Do you remember that mighty warrior? God opened his eyes and angels were all about a fire. We don't know how well equipped we are as part of God's army. Moses pursued seeing the invisible God. This is a complete picture of faith. Faith is seeing God in his glorious program. Faith is certainty in what God says against conditions to the contrary. Moses' example of tripping and failure is the story of nearly every single Christian learning to live by faith. It's a journey of conflict and testing that doesn't end. It prepares us to be one with God in heaven as we learn to trust him all the way. Faith is certainty in what God says against the conditions to the contrary. Don't give up. Don't lose faith. Don't lose hope. Put your confidence in the word and character of God Almighty. And you will be strong forevermore. He has made us overcomers. Amen? Amen.